Hello and welcome to everyone watching live tonight on ChrisD.ca and ILikeHue.com. This is the Equate Debate between 5 Winnipeg mayoral candidates. My name's Royce Koop. I'm a political studies professor at the University of Manitoba, and I'll be moderating this debate tonight. Special thank you, first of all, to Hue Productions and to ChrisD.ca for putting together this great event where we can get to know 5 candidates for mayor a little bit better tonight. Let's introduce them at the start. We'll start on that side. First is Shone. Second is Don Woodstock. Third is Clacio. Fourth is Idris Adelakun. And finally is Rana Bokhari. Before moving on, we do want to acknowledge that tonight we're on Treaty 1 territory. We're on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, the OG Cree, the Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and also on the homeland of the Métis Nation. So here's how tonight is going to work. We're going to begin with a 1-minute opening statement from each candidate. We'll then get into questions and discussion on 4 separate items. On each theme, the candidates are going to have a minute to answer the question, and then we'll move into discussion and rebuttal and debate for 4 minutes before moving on to the next theme. The speaking order is determined randomly for the opening and the closing statements, as well as for responses in each item. The 4 themes we'll be addressing tonight are, and the candidates knew about these beforehand, first is crime, second is poverty and homelessness, third is reconciliation and Winnipeg's Indigenous Accord, and finally, municipal taxes and financing. So we'll get right to the opening statements, and the randomly determined order. The first person to give an opening statement with 1 minute is Don Woodstock.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I want to be the mayor of Winnipeg because I've seen a few atrocities firsthand. My business takes me into people's homes, and I've seen the kind of fear that people have going through for the last little while. I've done a few things over the many years in terms of small initiative in the city. I was the guy who got the city to change from garbage day to recycle day. I'm also the one who promote the business of reusable bags. Today I'm happy to see Walmart and others following it. I'm also the one, contrary to what people tell you, who would lobby the city and push for Homes for Heroes to be here. It wasn't Kevin. And so one of the things that I wanted to do tonight is to let you know that donwoodstock.com has our platform and our issues, and you can join us there. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Rick, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Rick Shone. I've chosen to live in Winnipeg, and I've chosen to raise a family and build a business here. I've invested in Winnipeg, both financially and with my time, to make this place that we live in better. Like many of you, I had high hopes for our city leadership, but over the past few years, I've been disappointed time and time again. You know, Winnipeg needs strong leadership. They need someone who can work with others to get things done. I'll be a mayor who sets clear priorities, one that makes sense, that can be paid for and have great impact for our quality of life. Services have been cut time and time again. Our debt is out of control. We spend records amount of dollars on roads every single year, only to be left with the worst roads in the country. Our city is dirty, garbage everywhere. We have folks living in bus shelters. But I believe we can be a world-class city. To be world-class, we need to start by getting the basics right. Winnipeg is a great city, and we have so much going for us and so much potential. We can achieve it together.
Okay, thanks so much, Rick. Next we'll hear from Rana Bokhari.
I'm Rana Bokhari, a candidate for mayor, and I'm very happy to be here amongst colleagues who've become friends throughout this campaign. So much has happened in the past 3 years, and I think what post-COVID, what it has shown us is that there is a disproportionate effect of crisis on the most vulnerable people in this city. As a lawyer for 10 years, as a human rights advocate, as someone who believes that people will always and should always come before politics, I choose to base my campaign on how to lift people from the most vulnerable situations of drug addiction, mental health, poverty, homelessness, because I know for a fact, evidence will show, facts will show that when we take care of the most vulnerable people in any city, our entire city will do well. And that is my focus. That is what I want to do, and that is why I'm running for mayor.
Okay, thanks so much. Next, we'll hear from Chris Clacio.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Clacio. Back in 2014, I decided to run for mayor, but could not find the official agent or even open up a bank account. But back in 2014, I did run for school trustee. And back in 2014, I was also engaged in the civic process. And I remember a candidate talking about a new generation of leadership. For me, I'm done talking about the new generation of leadership, and we should be talking about the next generation of leadership. And for me, young people, young professionals, they are the future. And as a young representative who calls himself a civic practitioner and a policy entrepreneur, I think this is the city where young entrepreneurs will make a difference and be involved in the civic process. Because if you don't understand civics, then you don't understand local economic development.
Okay, thanks so much, Chris. And finally, we'll hear from Idris Adelakun.
Hello everyone, my name is Idris Adelakun. I'm a professional engineer in the province of Manitoba. I'm a certified project manager. I'm also a certified professional in engineering management. I completed a PhD in leadership from Carolina University and a master's degree from the University of Manitoba. I want a city that works for everyone. I strongly believe that we need to improve on how we do things, and I'm focusing on 4 key areas. I'm focusing on trying to improve on homelessness, addictions, and mental health. Right now, we have over 1,000 people that are homeless, and there's a need for us to figure out how to help them. Part of my plan is to provide 800 housing units within the next 4 years. Another point is to make sure that we create more opportunities in our city. A lot of people there don't want to stay in the province and even in the city because they don't have a lot of opportunities. So there is a need for us to create more opportunities and make everyone feel at home. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to move on to our first item of debate now, and that is the issue of crime. I'm going to ask the question. Everyone will have a minute to address the question, and then we'll have 4 minutes for discussion and debate. So in a recent probe survey of Winnipeggers, just under 50% identified crime as the biggest issue facing the city, and in fact this is the biggest concern amongst those surveyed. What are your plans for addressing this concern? And why should Winnipeggers see you as the best candidate to do so? And we'll first hear from, again in random order, Shone. Go ahead.
Crime does exist in every major city, but it's how we approach the management and prevention of crime that sets us apart. So my plan to manage crime, it really effectively includes, first of all, conducting a full audit of 911 services, 911 dispatch. Second, to expand the foot patrol and bike patrol initiatives in central Winnipeg. And I'd also like to recommend a unit be created for veteran officers who handle priority 5 calls only. At this time, I've committed to not increasing the police budget. However, I do recognize that we spend a lot on emergency services. So we need to look at how do we reduce the workload for police and get them out of some of the roles that are better served by social services, such as expanding the mobile crisis unit, expanding the cadet program to get police out of hospitals and onto the street and managing crime effectively.
Okay, next we'll hear from Rana Bokhari.
Thank you. Throughout this campaign, I haven't wavered on 3 things: that everything is connected. Crime is connected to poverty. Poverty and homelessness are connected. And the rampant drug addiction issues in the city are all connected. And it's not to say that just because someone is dealing with a drug issue, that means that they're just related to crime. But I think we have to acknowledge the fact that the drugs that are on the streets right now are some of the most vicious drugs we have seen, most likely in our history. It's the kind of drug that would probably make even the most sincere person want to go out and do whatever they need to do to get their fix. Now, we're dealing with a homelessness issue, we're dealing with a poverty issue, we're dealing with a crisis issue when it comes to addiction. I do not believe that we cannot proceed. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over. The right way to do this, the evidence-based way to proceed when it comes to crime is get to the root of it, and that means creating a safe consumption site.
Thanks very much. Dawn, you take it away.
Crime has ripped our city apart over the years, and for me, it's looking at the kind of stress that the police currently is under. And for every minute and a half, there's someone calling 911. The dispatcher cannot dispatch the police if they don't have it. The city has grown more than 30%, and the land mass has almost doubled in size. So the police cannot keep up right now. So a lot of folks think the budget is way high, but the police needs our help. So every dollar that the police currently give back to the city in the form of rent, vehicles, gas, etc., I would give back that to the police for the first 4 years, because they need to expand, they need to get more vehicles out. And most importantly, the provincial government needs to come in and help with some of the roles to lighten the load of the police and make sure the police at least follow the act, arrest who need to be arrested, and charge who need to be charged. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Idris, take it away.
Thank you very much for that. One of the things I want to do is to involve our youth. There's a need for me to have a youth crime prevention program, and we are going to tap funding from the federal. I believe that we have a lot of money we can get from that area. Another point is to make sure that we support our police. We can't continue to use force only. I want to collaborate with our social services so that we can also free them for more challenging tasks so they can get involved in those ones. Then we can free them up from doing all those things. Then another point is to make sure that we address all those underlying issues. If you look at my plan under idrisformayor.com, you will see that I've highlighted some points such as poverty. We also need to make sure we make provision for affordable housing, and we also need to make sure that we create more opportunity in our city to engage our people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Finally, we'll hear from Chris Clacio.
Early in the election, I made a commitment, a vow specifically, to cap the police budget to 20% of the total city budget, or equivalent to 18.3% of the fire paramedics services budget. I believe that the problem that our police service is having is the lack of management of city staff, police officers on the streets. I believe that police officers, senior administrations must understand how to look at the data, crime stats, other data analysis, to really look at specific hotspots in the city to address where the violent crime and other specific crime to really prevent and deter any kind of crime in that vicinity. So that's my commitment.
Okay, thanks so much. So now we'll turn to a debate and discussion. We might have a bit of a problem because these candidates seem like a very nice group of people, but now is the opportunity to mix it up. If anyone wants to expand on their answers, take issue with anything another candidate said.
Can I just please jump
take
in?
a speaker. Go ahead, Ron.
So we were hearing from candidates. There's 5 of us here, and almost every one of them has somehow spoken about how to either increase the police budget, have the police budget remain the same, increase policing, and again, those are not the ways to reduce the crime. If at $320 million, 27% of our current budget is going towards police, and Winnipeggers cannot call 911 and actually get a response, what does that tell us? That the system is not working. Increasing funding to the police budget will not help. We need to get to the root causes. That's why I've committed
Rana,
10% to reallocate into social services. That will go into homelessness, go into poverty,
part of that, though,
go into social
is
services.
what I was mentioning is the dispatch service. I mean, you have a 911 dispatch right now. It has 45% turnover, and 30% of the staff are quitting within the first year. They also, like, right at the very start, when somebody is calling the police, they cannot effectively triage the calls properly. So, this is a major issue where we start at. And, right now, 80% of the police budget is actually tied up in salaries and contracts. So unless we're willing to lay off a ton of people, we really can't do a 10% decrease at this moment.
But the truth is, one second, Rana, but the truth is that when you look at the 911 calls, the amount of calls that the police are receiving on a daily basis, every single minute and a half, there's a 911 call that goes out from we sit here. How do you correct that? I have spoken to the police a number of times. I've seen them in the road, seen on the beat. I've seen them standing at Walmart. The police are now managing our Walmarts and our superstores. Guys, the fact of the matter is the provincial government has taken away some responsibility that the police should be able to help and alleviate the problem, and that responsibility need to go back to peace officers so the police can free up themselves. At the end of the day, the city has grown, the city has expanded, and 23 cars cannot do.
One
That's
thing I
great.
do,
Let's
one thing
give
I do
Ron a
agree.
chance to go
At
first.
the end of the
Okay.
day, we're missing the crux of the issue. The issue is there is rampant crime in the city, which means that crime is happening for a reason. And what I'm saying is that the reason that that crime is happening is addictions, homelessness, poverty, and all of those other issues.
Yes, I
So
completely agree. Yeah.
what would increasing a police budget do if we haven't resolved those issues? And when you have limited
So
funding
we
for a
need to do those
municipality,
things in tandem and simultaneously. That's my
it's
position on that.
320 million. You have a budget that's taking 27% of the entire
Yeah,
municipal
but that's not
budget.
true. But that's not true because the police rents, every vehicle that they have, they lease, and the lease is to the city.
Well, not
every,
only that,
every,
they
every,
rent the HQ
Re-
headquarters
exactly.
as well,
So
which goes
every
right back to the
it
city.
goes right back to the city. So again, I ask the question: if I gave you, Rana, if I gave you $100,000 to manage this facility, and every month, every year, you give me back $30,000, what is your budget? Your budget is not
One thing that
100,000.
Rana did say though about, and I completely agree with, is we have to try to figure out a way to remove police from certain calls like wellness checks.
Yes.
And responding to people who are having mental health crises and
Absolutely.
addictions. I completely 100%.
But then
agree
how
with
are you
that.
planning on funding those organizations that require
Sure.
to answer those calls?
Yeah.
We need to take a
Provincial
balanced
government
approach.
Well,
helps.
and that's-
Just-
provincial
just a
and federal-
reminder, just a rem-
provincial
Let's
and
let Chris-
provincial government have to do with sense of mental health, not the city.
Just
so let's
a,
let Chris have a chance.
just a reminder that none of the mayoral candidates here is able to direct police operations, and I think that if we really want to
That's
cap
why
the
I've
police
also
budget,
stated
we
we
have
need
to
new-
talk with our city council candidates.
That's why I stated we also need new leadership at the top, someone who does understand the constraints that we're in right now in the city.
I know, but Rick, you also don't have authority to fire the chief of police.
I never
And I
said
know
fire.
that, I know
never said
that,
fire.
but you
I
know
did
that's
say
out there.
resign, 'cause
And
I
I
think
gave you
it's-
the opportunity to clarify. I gave you the opportunity to clarify.
Idris, do you want to jump in quickly
Yes,
before the
so
end of the segment?
I know we've been talking about this issue. One of the things I have in my plan is to make sure that we address all those underlying issues before we start reducing the police budget. Even my plan is to collaborate, call the police, when we start addressing all those issues that we have at hand. And at the end of the day, it will be very easy for us to be able to talk about, reducing budget. But for now, when you still have a lot of crime in the city, it is difficult to, cut their budget from my own perspective. But it's something that we can do with time. But if we don't address all those underlying issues, it will be very difficult for us to be able to talk about reducing their budget. Another plan, my plan is to make sure that when I become the next mayor, I'm going to be part of the Winnipeg Police Board. We can collaborate, we can rub minds together, we can bring ideas. I'm going to involve a lot of stakeholders in that. Then that will enable us to be able to resolve the issue together. Thank you.
And I would
Okay.
agree with that, and I will also do the same thing until we get a new police chief.
All right, so let's wrap up this segment. That was great, very exciting. We're going to move on to our second theme now, which is poverty and homelessness. So following the same format, the question is, in that same survey of Winnipeggers that I mentioned earlier, about a quarter of respondents identified poverty and homelessness as major concerns facing the city. What approach will you bring to tackling the problems of poverty and homelessness in Winnipeg? We have another randomly determined order, and the first person we'll hear from this time is Don Woodstock.
We had an opportunity in 2018 to address some of these issues, and Mayor Brian Bowman did nothing about it. Going forward, we have to examine the underlying cause of poverty. We have jobs. The city of Winnipeg wasn't open and has not been open for business. Investors are not running here. We are in the center of Canada. And if we're in the center of Canada, we have a very, very inexpensive labor force. We have a very expensive land cost. We have a very, very cheap hydro. Why is it we don't have multilateral corporations coming here in droves? And the problem is we have bad politics. Bad politics have led us to this way. And the status quo hasn't worked. And I'm happy to tell you, vote Don Woodstock because I'm none of the above. all they're going to be doing is giving us bad politics, and we need to create job and incentives for people to do business here, and we can do it if we pull our minds and hearts together to open the city again for business. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Idris, you're next up on this.
Yeah, in terms of homelessness, if you look at my plan, if you go to idrisformayor.com, you will see that I've already promised 800 housing units within 4 years. And we are not going to build all new 800 housing units. We are going to use some unused building in downtown as well as part of those 800. And I've already came up with a model. I've been working with builders, so it's just for us to start working on that. And I'm going to get funding from the federal, province and the city. We are going to collaborate together to ensure that we address homelessness. In terms of other aspect, what is going to happen in fall when it gets colder? Because we can't build 800 houses right now. So I'm going to support the expansion of 24-hour safe spaces as well, so that we can make sure that our people, they don't get frostbite. We need to start acting right now. We need to work on that. And another thing I want to do is to make sure that we address poverty. I'm going to also make sure that we support the builders so they can have a 200 housing unit in downtown every year. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Next is Chris Clacio on poverty and homelessness in Winnipeg.
Just basic civics 101 about our municipal government. The city of Winnipeg does have a Winnipeg poverty reduction strategy that I do want to promote. But I even want to expand that notion of let's abolish poverty in this city. I believe that as a civic practitioner and a policy entrepreneur, the policy that I always think about is basic income. And many people think the basic income is all about giving people free money. Wrong. The problem with basic income is about access to resources, aka money, to fulfill citizens' city services. How can I access city services if I don't have money to pay for those services? So it's a question of thinking about what is our vision for our city. A mayoral candidate once told me that city planning, long-term city planning. Let's think about the future.
Okay, thanks so much, Chris. Next up is Rick Shone.
So we know as a city that we have a problem. We have an addictions crisis. We have people living in bus shacks. We know this, but we've been closing our eyes and just pretending it hasn't been happening. And so that's why early on I announced that I would build a supervised consumption site. And I know that's not a very popular idea with a lot of people, but the reason why we need it is because we need a formal, safe space where people can come and actually be wrapped around with supports and potentially get in front of the people who can help them on the road to recovery. And I think it's a really important thing. And each policy that I have brought forward in my plan has had both a financial benefit and a social benefit to the city, which I think is really important. And two quick things on the housing. One is I have targeted vacant housing. We have like 800, 700 houses right now that are vacant. I think they can become a great housing stock. The other thing is parking minimums. I think we need to get rid of parking minimums in our city so that we can build housing at a faster pace, smaller units, a more affordable price as well.
Okay, thanks so much. And finally, we'll hear from Rana Bokhari.
I'm going to agree with Rick on two things. So number one, safe consumption sites. I've been speaking about safe consumption sites. It was one of my second announcements because I so deeply believe that it is one of the most important issues that we can utilize right away as soon as possible, even in a mobile form, in an effort to start to have people come off the street. We need to start treating people and those who are living in poverty with compassion, with dignity. Homelessness is not something that just has happened. This is something that people have been struggling with invisibly and visibly for a number of years. And now that it's in front of everyone's face, we are being forced to deal with it. And that's the wrong way. So I know we don't want to criticize what's happened in the past and we want to move forward, but we have to acknowledge that many mistakes were made, which means we don't want to go back. We don't want to keep doing the same thing that we've been doing for a number of years. Abandoned homes, vacant homes, I agree, there's 700 in the city. I want to provide those to community organizations to start to rebuild homes to home the unhoused.
Okay, thanks so much. So we did see some disagreement between the candidates on this issue, so why don't we kind of flesh that out a little? We'll move to the 4 minutes of debate and discussion. Who wants to take it
Can
away?
I ask Rick a question? In your policy talking about vacant houses, my question to you is, why are you committed to 2% of that fee? Why not put it up to 4% of as a fee?
Well, so Chris, I don't disagree with what you're saying there. I think, and I'll clarify this because some other candidates have said they would seize the vacant houses. I'm not going to do that. And the reason why was we need to have a controlled approach to this. Okay, we need to give people the opportunity to actually do what they need to do and turn these houses into renovated houses that are now affordable places for people to live. A 2% tax, which is double what we currently have right now, would actually bring in, let's say, roughly $3 million per year. On a $250,000 assessed house, it's a $5,000 fee a year. If that doesn't work, oh yeah, we'll go up 3%, 5%. Vancouver is at 5% right now, and they're seeing great success on that. And so yeah, I think it can work quite well. We need to get these houses back in the housing stock.
Yeah, but we don't have to tax people that way, Rick, with all due respect, because I have worked personally in my business with a lot of the flippers that are in the inner core neighborhood. And one thing I can tell you for sure, if they only had a city who was prepared to work with them, a lot of these homes would have been renovated and flipped, because some of these guys are my biggest client. And the honest truth is my plan is going to not seize anybody home. What I'm going to do is give them the option. You got 3 months. Because as it is now, if the house is burnt and is sitting there, the city of Winnipeg will not even give you permission to lick it down or tear it down, because that's rubbish. So I would say fast track all of these applications and say, okay, you, Mr. Owner, you got 3 months. You got two choices. You're either going to build and renovate the home, or if you can't, the city will lend you the money at whatever interest rate that's competitive to make sure that you build,
So-
and then you will sell. But hang on a second. But here's the facts.
That works in theory, but not all flippers are like that.
But I'm not talking about flippers. I'm
dozens
talking
of
about
houses in the West End.
Yeah, but
Yes.
I'm
that
talking
have
about
sat
homes
empty forever.
Yeah, but I'm talking
And
about
burned down.
responsible. Yes, I'm talking about responsible home ownership.
Now
And
let-
part of the issue is that the responsible ownership want to do something. They want to do something. The city
Let's-
is
let's
not
let-
working with them.
Okay,
If I
thanks.
may.
Let's
Some
let-
of them are.
If I
Some of
may.
them are.
How to deal with these homes is prescribed in bylaws already,
And
which
it's not
means
working.
it's not working because we haven't enforced those bylaws. So when a city,
not true.
that is absolutely true.
It
So
is-
when
it
the
is
city of
actually true.
Winnipeg has bylaws, when you have a procedure to do something and the enforcement portion of that has not been happening, obviously we're going to have the situation that we see right now.
Yeah,
City
but
brings
We
in-
have
Okay.
the city brings in
700
only
homes.
half a
Let's
million
just hold
dollars
on.
on these.
We have
Hold on.
700
right
homes
now.
in this city. Definitely, if we follow that bylaw, everything you're saying, those homeowners will have an opportunity to board it. They will have a, so
No.
they will have.
We're missing
Okay.
an
They
element.
will
Don,
have an
Don, let's just
opportunity
hold on,
to
just let her
board them up.
finish.
They'll have an opportunity to fix them. They'll have all that opportunity. And I think when when folks like myself are saying at some point the buck needs to stop. If you've given every opportunity to fix a home and
But
you're
that's
not
not
doing
true.
I would
it,
agree
But
with
that's
that.
not
Now,
no.
let's-
I
let's-
know
true.
firsthand
Don.
that's
That
not
is
true.
absolutely
no,
factually
listen,
correct.
guys, listen.
It's
The
a
bylaws are
factually
there. The
correct
bylaws are
statement.
there, and all the city is doing is finding a ways to go there and enforce.
Of course you have to enforce
Okay.
bylaws.
We have a complaint
Charge
system.
them-
We have a complaint
No,
system,
it
and it could be
doesn't-
up
it
to
doesn't
5
work.
years
It doesn't
before
work.
you start getting fined. That's why I said it needs to be
That's why it
6
So
doesn't
months.
it's
work.
about
It doesn't
enforcement.
work.
Yes.
No.
It's about
No.
enforcement of
You
the
fast
current
track- you
laws and
fast track-
bylaws.
Okay,
No,
so
you
we're going
fast track
to
these-
stop discussion on this now. Chris, I want to give you a chance to get in.
I'll just say, Rick, I'm gonna follow your lead, and actually, my commitment's not 2%. It's a 4% for those derelict buildings.
Well, definitely, like I said, Chris, I would be happy to raise that if it's not working properly.
Okay, and we are right on time, so thanks so much for that. So we'll move on to our third theme. This is reconciliation and on Winnipeg's Indigenous Accord. So in 2017, Winnipeg Council unanimously adopted Winnipeg's Indigenous Accord, which commits the city to continued reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. We know that Winnipeg also has the largest urban Indigenous population of any city in the country. How will you ensure that Indigenous people in Winnipeg are included when developing policies as mayor? And how will you advance reconciliation efforts as mayor of Winnipeg? Random order again. First, we'll hear from Rana Bokhari.
Thank you. So I just want to commend the fact that the Accord, the Indigenous Accord, does exist. I also want to acknowledge the fact that just recently it has started to include MMIW and those calls for justice as well, which I 100% am behind. I support it. I will continue to support it. But I think that that was an educational piece, but we need to move it forward. I 100% believe that we need to implement all TRC action items that apply to municipalities, number one. I have said this numerous times. I 100% believe, I'm committed to this, to ensure that all of our departments, our city staff are actively trained in education in regards to history, and how to treat people with dignity and respect based on those historic issues. Further to that, I think it's very important to make sure that we have some form of advisory boards in regards to missing and murder that's separate from the Accord, so there's action.
Okay, thanks so much, Idris. Next, we'll hear from you.
Yes, so from my own perspective, I want to make sure that I improve on what has been done in terms of the Accord. So I want to add that call action number 57, whereby we can, provide professional training and on truth and reconciliation, so that public servants, they can learn more about truth and reconciliation, about the residential schools. And my idea, to promote that is just to make sure that when they understand more about that, they can also train their children, and everyone will be able to have an understanding about truth and reconciliation. And everyone will be able to, have a kind of idea that, what, we need to improve on this, and it will help the community at large. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Next, we'll hear from Chris Clacio.
One of my commitments is to address number 49 of the TRC calls to action, and that is acknowledging the European sovereignty, to acknowledge and challenge this idea of European sovereignty over treaty without master, and so when I've been working with urban indigenous young people for over 7 years, and one thing that they've taught me is, what does reconciliation mean? What does truth mean? For me, there is no such thing as truth and reconciliation until there is justice and healing for our city. And that is what we need to focus on, is supporting our relatives on the streets, because they are the most needed today, and they have the lived experience to answer our calls to action.
All right, thanks so much. Next, we'll hear from you, Don.
Recently, I was joined by the former chief of Long Plain First Nation, Peter Yellow Quilt, in which I proposed that in support of truth and reconciliation, and to continue this effort, we'll have 28 indigenous leaders across Manitoba coming to City Hall on a monthly basis. There'll be one seat at the table for the federal government, and one for the provincial government, and two for the city representative, which will be the mayor if I'm so chosen. But the idea is more so to bring into full those learned experiences, because a lot of time bureaucrats talk about things, they try to implement it on their own without any real hands-on personal experience. And for me, that's what it is, because truth sometimes can be ugly, but we have to deal with the truth. And in order to deal with the truth, it's always good. Case in point, 2015, when I asked Pat Martin what he did for people with mental health, all of a sudden, more people are talking about mental health. So that's what I'll do. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And next up is Rick Shone.
Yeah, I support the process of reconciliation. And, although I've been pretty critical of the city and the management in the past, I think we've actually made really great strides forward when it comes to reconciliation. And we've had a really ugly discussion this week on social media in regards to this, and it's disappointing. I think we need to continue sharing. We need to continue learning. Reconciliation requires public education and dialogue, and it requires us to acknowledge the harms and the indignity of our past. And so, as mayor, I would work every day to unify our city, so it becomes a place where everyone has a voice. And I want us to live in a city with a heart, where we recognize that everyone has the same dreams and goals and aspirations. And as we grow to a city of 1 million people, on working downtown, I see so many people who are new to Winnipeg, but not new from other countries, new from First Nations reserves. And so early on, I had announced an Embracing Winnipeg strategy where we work with Indigenous governments to help transition newcomers, First Nations newcomers, to Winnipeg, so that they can find housing, find jobs, and find things to support them.
Okay, that's great. And now we all know what's coming next, open debate and discussion. So whoever wants to jump in and get the first word.
I just so, I think me and Rick are quite similar in our process there. And Don, I agree with you with having Indigenous leadership at the table at City Hall to ensure that the voices are constantly being heard. I think the only difference between me right now is that Winnipeg is ground zero for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. There's a lot of policing issues. There's a lot of issues when it comes to what is happening on the streets. Women are going missing. We have issues with taxis that, the code of conduct was a fight to get in itself. There's so many peripheral issues that also need to be dealt with. And I appreciate Rick, because I know that we were watching the same Twitter feed, and I know that you and I probably both were feeling that disgust. And I publicly say that. I believe that a city that is compassionate, a city that believes that we are all equal, a city that recognizes our history and our past, and moves forward in a good way, but with, side by side is really what we're going to have to do. But to ignore what's happening, to pretend that it's not happening, to pretend that we didn't get to this situation because of ignoring it for so long, will not get us forward. So I want to just, I agree with you, Rick, and actually Don, on that piece, I do agree with you as well.
All right, go ahead, Chris.
I wanted to ask Rana this question. A lot of mayoral candidates have committed to be on the board of the police board. My curiosity is, why don't you appoint or ask city councilors to appoint you as the board chair? I feel like if we really want to address missing and murdered Indigenous women, it should be a woman be the lead on the police board. So why haven't you committed to that position?
Yeah, it's not that I haven't committed to it. I don't think that me sitting on a police board, when we need to get to the root of the cause, which means that police know what's happening. Me sitting on a police board, what we're actually talking about, if we really want to get to the crux of it, the details of it, we're talking about systemic issues. We're talking about systemic barriers. We're talking about systemic racism. We're talking about institutional issues that me sitting on that board will be great, and I'm totally open to doing it. However, I think that this is not my priority. I think my priority is breaking down barriers, getting to the root of these systemic issues, getting through the policies to ensure that we are taking a human rights approach to all that we do, that we are acknowledging the harms of the past, that we're not on Twitter dividing the communities.
Yeah,
But the police board, what's wrong with it is citizens don't trust the police board. If I saw you on the police board, I would have more trust in the political system that we have.
Most people actually know who's on the police board, but yeah.
But
And
part of the
I
issue, part of
respect
this
that.
is,
That's
yeah,
it's
but
a
part
good-
of this is
yeah.
that if we really want to get to the root of this, we have to. If we're going to respect authorities, we need to. And there are a lot of misinformation out there. The RCMP did a report, and people still don't buy that report. And yet still I've asked folks that if the RCMP report is something that you disagree with, then you have an obligation, a moral one too, to bring forward to the table what your findings are. Recently, the MMF president got $1.5 million to make sure that the disproportionate of men in the correctional facilities are not Indigenous men. And the chief, who lost 11 members of his First Nation community, said exactly what I said, which is that we need to start looking at this thing from the issue of Indigenous men and the atrocities that done. Those are the words of the chief. Those are not my words. And
think
I'm
it's
very
really
happy.
important that
And I'm
you
very happy,
stop
Rana. 1 second.
perpetuating
Stop for a
that
second, Rana, please.
stereotype.
Please,
I think
Rana.
it's very
Please, Rana,
important
stop.
that you stop perpetuating that
Rana,
stereotype.
stop, because you call me names that will eventually going to end up with you with a lawsuit when I'm done. But that's okay. That's fine. The fact of the matter is the
Happily
facts
accept
the facts
Happily
are
accept that to state
out
truth.
there. The facts are out there, and if anybody have any additional information, they have an obligation to bring it forward.
I think the
Okay.
most important thing here is like we
you can
need to
respond.
create we need to create a city without racism. In
Yeah,
2015,
thank
we were
you.
called the most racist city
Yes.
in Canada.
Let's abolish racism.
This is
How do you
this is
abolish
not
racism if we
acceptable.
don't want to get to the institutional issues? So thank you, Rick. I agree. That's absolutely true. And I just want to, Don, you're talking about the RCMP report, which is an outside report. Why are we not talking about the MMIW report, that national report that probably does not agree with the RCMP report? Why do you need an outside report to tell you what's happening on the ground when MMIW has their own report? That's
Okay.
the report we should be focusing on. Calls
No,
to
we
justice.
shouldn't. We shouldn't focus on that
Of
report
course we
because
should focus
they
on
are
that.
the RCMP has given us facts based on case.
Okay.
Facts based on
I
case.
think it's really important, respectfully, I think it's very important for us to have a discussion about how policing and indigenous peoples, it's not a, we all shake hands and move forward in a good way. It's a problematic relationship.
Okay.
Facts based
maybe-
on case says that
now I
there's
think-
70% of indigenous men are
I think
in.
you need
are
to stop
in-
perpetuating that.
I think the
it's
points,
very
the
important.
points have all been made,
I
and
think
it's
it's
time to move
false.
on to the
Very
next
false.
theme. Thanks so much for the spirited discussion, everyone. We'll move
It's
on
absolutely
to.
false, and it's actually very
Okay,
disrespectful.
I think it is time to move on to taxes and city finances. So, last question of tonight is several candidates in this race have said they will hike property tax and frontage levy rates in Winnipeg. At least one candidate, and I think now two candidates, has promised to freeze property tax rates. How will you pay for your campaign promises? And will this include raising taxes? If it does, how can you justify that to Winnipeggers who are struggling in the current affordability crisis? First up this time is Rick Shone.
Okay. So I originally decided to run for mayor because I was fed up with the fiscal management of our city. We have a city that can't function properly because of years of mismanagement. We build great plans, but we are terrible at executing them. So we're in the poor financial situation that we're in for, I think, two reasons. One is we had prolonged tax freezes and or decreases that began way back in 1998. We've also had very poor fiscal management over the past 6 years. So having said that, at this time, I'm still not proposing to increase taxes right now because I do recognize that Winnipeggers are facing a period of unknown inflation right now. We don't know what to expect, and many are experiencing a lot of hardships coming out of the pandemic. Many of my policies that I have brought forward are either revenue neutral or we can pay for them by rearranging budget lines, and have really only focused on the biggest expenses that are the most important for long-term economic growth of the city.
Okay, thanks so much. Next we'll hear from you, Chris.
The city budget is $1.2 billion. As an everyday citizen who doesn't own $1.2 billion, how do we direct that money? Not many citizens understand the budget process. I feel so frustrated that our political leaders do not educate young people. Even our public school systems don't educate me on financial literacy, and that is what's missing. The way the city does their budget process is they have two budgets, the operational budget and the capital budget. The capital budgets are the one-time purchases. That is basically construction projects. Secondly, the operations is labor costs, and fuel costs. Those are everyday payments that the city must pay to use city services.
Okay, thanks so much, Chris. Next up is Rana Bokhari.
Thank you. I think the most important thing is the fact that Winnipeggers are struggling. I think that we have talked about poverty that is very visible, but there's also a lot of poverty that is invisible. We have people who are working paycheck to paycheck, and a little bit of a movement will basically derail their lives. And I know this because I've been speaking to those individuals. A tax rate increase right now is not something that I want to do. I think that the 2022 budget is a 2.33% tax increase. I would do that for 2022, 2023, and in 2024, if I have shown Winnipeggers that we are transparent, if I've shown Winnipeggers that we are accountable, if I've shown Winnipeggers that we have been a good steward of the public purse, then and only then will we review and consider raising the taxes anymore. Right now, we need to get Winnipeggers through post-COVID. We need to get Winnipeggers through what's happening with inflation. We need that to balance itself out. We need Winnipeggers to see vibrancy on their streets to be able to want to contribute more. I would leave it at that. My time's up.
Okay, thanks so much. Next up is Don Woodstock on taxes and city finances.
We have never called in a performance bond by the construction industry. There's a lot of inefficiencies out there. And one of the things that I would do, I would seek out these inefficiencies. The Manitoba Heavy Construction Association has been lobbying the city to get in the business of recycling aggregate, which will save us easily $40 million, $50 million annually. This is something that will be a must for us. If we look at these inefficiencies and we address them, then we can't go wrong. I'm going to be also giving back people money on the water. You know, we're making money on this water bill and the water rates. So why are we not rebating people if we have excess? The PP&D every year make a big profit. What do they do with it? Throw it into general fund. Accountability needs to happen. And for me, that's what I would do. Make sure we have these inefficiencies looked at seriously, especially in the construction industry. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And last, we'll hear from Idris.
Yes, I'm not planning to increase taxes. My plan is to ensure that we change our budgeting structure from traditional increment approach, to priority-based budgeting. And I know this is one of the recommendations from the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce as well, and I strongly believe in that. We need to focus on what is important to Winnipeggers right now. Inflation and some other issues that we have right now. So from my own perspective, there is a need for us to make sure that we allocate our resources to the areas that are important. Then we can make sure that Winnipeggers, they don't feel that kind of a pressure. When you increase taxes right now, some people, they cannot even afford to even pay their rent properly, Then when you do that, what is going to happen again? So my plan is to make sure that I don't increase taxes right now. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Once again, we see some real differences between the candidates, and maybe we can expand on those. And you'd like to go first, Rick?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I just wanted to add to that is that, like for me personally, I look at financial statements all the time. I mean, I'm a business owner. I have a good understanding of them. When I first started running for mayor, I looked through the last 10 just to get an understanding. And then a couple months later, unfortunately, I had to go back to 1998 because we had another candidate who came in. And, those early financial statements, I'm telling you, they were the least transparent things I've ever seen in my life. Today, we do have, statements that are listed online, but they are not clear. Like, as an average citizen, you cannot get a good idea of where the money is actually being spent. And so this is why I said, as mayor, the first thing I'd have to do is basically fling open the books and see exactly where the money is, what we're spending things on. If we can look at where are we giving money to, what budgets, look at fees, fines, permits, can we raise some revenues there? The absolute, the last resort would be to raise taxes at this point, because Winnipeggers have said that they're willing to pay more taxes in some cases. But would you want to pay taxes if you really have no clear idea at this point how your money is being spent and if the value is actually being spent, if it's being spent well?
Go ahead, Chris.
I have a question for Rick. As a business owner, I'm not a business owner, but I one day do wish to be, since I call myself a civic practitioner and a policy entrepreneur and advocate for basic income in this province, is the question of the city has elected business people many times. Why hasn't any of the business leaders who we have elected not addressed our structural deficit? That's $6.9 billion.
Yeah. So I think first thing, I've experienced this question lots for people who are a little skeptical of business people coming into the city, right? I think the point is here is that a lot of business people who we've had in the past, they also have not been good governors. And so while we look for efficiencies, we also need to be good governors. And so there is a difference there. And in the capital budget, we have a huge deficit, as you know. But these are just wishful projects in most cases.
Okay.
They're not funded yet.
Okay.
So we just create a wish list and then we go out and we try to fund them.
I think when we're talking about finances, when we're talking about taxes, and when we're talking about any issue related to the public purse, I think that until we can show Winnipeggers that we are accountable and transparent, and the one thing that we can do as candidates, we can all do, which is something that I've committed to right off the bat, and one of my first announcements was to commit to continuing the police headquarters lawsuit. What we saw there was a squandering of taxpayer dollars. What we saw there was some of the most egregious actions that have wasted taxpayer dollars. So it's impossible for us to go to Winnipeggers today and ask them to do anything and trust in government
Yeah, but part of the one thing that is missing from this conversation, Glenn Murray changed the charter so we can borrow in the future. Sam Katz did the same thing. Brian Bowman did the same thing. Nobody's looking at that. And the reason why the other candidates are not trying to stop that from happening is because they want to do the same thing. They want to have that wishful thinking to borrow money 40, 50 years in the making. And who is paying for that? We're still paying today for Glen Murray's bridge. You know, so God knows when we'll ever start paying for Brian Bowman's $500 million in bond at 50-year loan. That needs to stop, and the provincial government or the city or the councillors with the mayor needs to stop that train and cut it off and let us not get into that borrowing thing anymore, because that's wrong.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Chris.
Civics 101, the way that city gets funding is through 4 ways. That's property taxes, user fees, debt from banks, and basically loans, and lastly, government transfers. So I think we really need to really work with other levels of government to really address our structural deficit.
Yeah, and you're perfectly right on
100%.
that, but there is a point where we can take on too much debt. And I said this the other day, it's, you know, city finance is interesting because you can borrow more money, yet your S&P rating goes up. You know, it's kind of a crazy thing. Like, if you tried to do that as an average person, nobody would ever give you more money.
No.
And I think we need to think outside the box. You know, we can't rely on taxes all the time. And that's why when you look at my platform, I created some stuff whereby we need to create more opportunities for Winnipeggers. And that will enable us to be able to generate more revenue. Then we can even reduce the stress on Winnipeggers. Thank you.
Okay.
You know, one
so-
thing, Idris, nobody has mentioned yet is the fact that how our property assessments have gone up quite a bit this
Yes.
year. So I would like to see what our revenues are actually going to look like.
Absolutely.
My business property tax went up 100%.
Yeah, and I think that Rick, again, I agree with you on the point of it's very difficult to have conversations about the financial, environment of what any new mayor is walking into, and it could be perceived as, almost reckless to make bold statements about what things look like. But we do know some basics. But I do recognize the fact that it's true. We don't really know what exactly is going on behind the scenes, but I think accountability, transparency, and trust in government when it comes to the public purse is the starting point of any of these discussions.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much for that great discussion. We are now going to try to stay on time. We're going to move towards candidates' closing statements. And we'll go in reverse order from the opening statement. So we'll start for 1 minute with Idris Adelakun.
This election is about leadership. And I strongly believe that we need to vote based on plan, not based on names. If you look at what has happened in the past and where we are right now, Winnipeg needs a voice that can speak for everyone. And I will tell you that if you vote for Idris, you are voting for transparency, accountability, honesty. And I believe with my skills, I should be able to transform the city to an enviable height. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much. Go ahead, Chris.
The main reason that I planned to run for public office for the highest position was back in 2014. I made a vow to myself that I would love to see a young person become our mayor for this city. I believe that the next generation of leadership is in this city of Winnipeg. And for me, win or lose, I'm so proud to be surrounded by a lot of my heroes in my life. And so when I think about the future, I trust every candidate on this stage and outside this stage. They deserve to be on that ballot. And I have made a vow back in 2014 that I would continue to run for public office for 2014, 2018, 2022, 2026, and 2030. And I am committed to that vow. And as you can tell, I'm running no matter what anyone tells me.
Okay. Thanks so much. Next up is Rana.
Thank you. I think one of the most important things in this election is not going back to something that hasn't given us really what we need. The fact that we are in this crisis right now, and I will confidently call it a drug crisis, the poverty issues that we are facing, the homelessness issues we are facing, the absolute disregard for human rights on the streets. Nothing we do right now has worked. It hasn't worked. And now is about believing in something that is bigger than all of us. We can't continue to do what we have done. We surely can't go back to the 1990s. And for me, what will always come first to me, what I've said throughout this campaign, it will always be people over politics. And what we need to do right now is lift the most vulnerable of our people in this city with compassion and with dignity. When our most vulnerable people are doing good, our businesses will do good. Our crime rates will decrease. Our police services won't be used as much. We will have our youth will want to stay in Winnipeg. That's the vision. That's the vision, and that's what I'm asking Winnipeggers to get behind. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Rana. Next, we'll hear Rick Shawn's closing statement.
Thanks, and thanks for having us here today. And I appreciate all these other candidates with me. You know, when I first decided to run for mayor, I was an outsider. I'm a business person. I'm not a politician. And so the reason why is because I looked at City Hall and the division that we have in our city right now, and a city that does not work. We need outside voices like the ones in this room who are challenging our politicians at the city level who have done things in a manner over the past few years that have not worked and have actually put us in a worse position going forward. So these voices in this room are really important, and I hope that, you know, in future elections, people remember that all voices are extremely important. We are faced with an election you know, where we're dealing with a lot of former politicians, and the status quo in our city is just simply not working.
Okay, thanks so much. And lastly, we'll hear from Don Woodstock.
Over the many years, Winnipeg, you have come to know me advocating for a number of things in the city. I'm one of the few people who, on my own time and dime, without getting paid for it, and I don't regret doing them. Because the things I believe in, I'm going to fight for, I'm going to push for. I'm none of the above. The status quo hasn't worked. They have turned their eyes and their backs on us on Winnipeg. And they have pretending as if they care, but they don't care. The status quo needs to go. Vote for somebody else that is not any one of us above, because at the end of the day, you're going to receive better from any one of us here than any one of the other guys above. Because of the fact of the matter is, we are going to be doing. Actions speak louder than words, okay? And when I advocate for things that I believe in, I'm going to fight for it, I'm going to push for it regardless of what it is. My name is Don Woodstock, and I'm asking you to vote differently this election. And all the people who have visited my website, if half of you go out and vote for me, I am the new mayor. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, everyone. This wraps up our first Equate Debate. I wanted to thank these great candidates for running, Hue Productions and ChrisD.ca for putting this event together, and also all of you for watching. And if you'd like to go and rewatch the debate, you can do so on ilikehue.com or ChrisD.ca. I hope you take into consideration what you've heard tonight when you cast your ballot on Election Day on October 26th, and thanks again for tuning in. Have a great night.